Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's March 7th, and I just figured while in preparation for our session today, I would take care of a few domestic things. There's actually a very funny story about this, what I'm doing here, and if you want to ask me in person someday, I'll be more than happy to share that with you. But today, again, is March 7th, and several things of interest on this date. It was on this date in 321 that the Emperor Constantine proclaimed that the Solus Invicti, or that is the Sun Day, would be the first day of the week. So I suppose you could argue that Constantine invented the weekend on this date in 321. In 1530, Henry VIII's divorce petition, he was hoping to divorce Catherine of Aragon to marry Anne Boleyn, was in fact denied by the Catholic Church. And I wonder, I know in U.S. history we tend to look back on things and we say, that wasn't really a very good decision. I wonder if the Catholic Church looks back and says, that wasn't really a very good decision, because if you know your Catholic history, or if you know your church history, you know that Henry VIII figured, if your church won't, I'm just going to start my own. And so he basically took over, kicked out the Catholic Church from England, and basically made Catholics persona non grata there for quite some time. That took place on this date. Again, it was denied. The petition was denied on this date in 1530. In 1857, the powers that be that defined baseball decided that a official game would end after 9 innings. Prior to that, in 1857, the game was over when a team got 9 runs. So they decided a team would go 9 innings here. Today's birthdays include, one other thing. In 1965, today is the Bloody Sunday. It's the day of the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. There was a movie came out a few years ago called Selma. Very interesting film. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Certainly one worth watching. That was the watch that John Lewis, the congressman and civil rights icon who recently passed away, was a part of that on that day. And that took place on this date in 1965. Let's see. Birthdays on this date include Rob Roy. Rob Roy, the Scottish folk hero, and another vehicle for yet another Liam Neeson movie. So if you're a big fan of Liam Neeson, look up that one on YouTube or Netflix or wherever you get your quality movies from. In 1942, Tammy Faye Baker was born on this day. Tammy Faye Baker Mesner. She died in 2007. Just watched something with them in it the other day. Interesting documentary about the Baker PTL Club and all that kind of stuff. That was on this date. She was born on this date in 1942. On this date in 322, just a year after Constantine had made his announcement about Sunday, Aristotle died. Aristotle, the great philosopher, famous for Aristotelian logic, metaphysics, and all that kind of stuff. Aristotle, who I don't believe ever started the tradition of never having an unpublished thought. But he died on this date in 322. Also, in 1274, Thomas Aquinas died. Thomas Aquinas, one of the great leaders of the church, famous for Thomism, or the scholastic school of theology. He died on this date in 1274. On this date in 1940, Oliver Hardy married. Oliver Hardy, he of Laurel and Hardy fame, at the age of 48, married a film assistant named Vivian, who was 30 at the time. So I guess that isn't that much of a cradle robbing, but he got married on this date in 1940. And finally, I will probably get kicked out of the family will for this, but it was on this date in 1959 that bells were ringing in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, when my parents were married. On this date, married in my grandparents' living room. They did not have a video, but there is an audio tape of it that I've listened to in the past. So that took place on this date in 1959. So I'm just about done here taking care of this, and so we'll get back to talking about 1 John. Welcome back. It's good to have you back. It's good to be here with a freshly pressed shirt, ready to go, talking about 1 John chapter 3. Now, last week we ended up talking about verses 16 through 17, and we mentioned where John is reiterating this thing about love and loving your neighbors. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, we talked about that. Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and truth. And I wanted to remind you of something, and that is about the nature of how dissemination worked back in the day. Okay, and what I mean by that is this: when we get the book of 1 John, or we get any of the Bible books, we have them in a book. We sit down and we read them carefully, and we parse them out, or we read a chapter, we read a page, whatever. That's not how it was in the first century. Okay, so in the first century, when this book would have originally been sent around, somebody would have read it to them, and they would have only had the oral remembrance to go by. Okay, so we can read a passage, we can underline it, we can set it on our bookshelf, we can leave it open on our nightstand and go back and see it as we go about our day. Well, they didn't have that. Okay, they didn't have the book in their hand, and so all they would have is the message that they could remember. And if you've ever taught a class, or if you've ever been in any sort of an education, or if you've had kids, and you know that the best way to teach somebody something is to just repeat the message over and over and over again. And so we'll be thinking about that, because as we go through 1 John today, in the brief time that we're going to be together today, you'll see there are several times where John says things that's like, wow, this is the same thing. And of course, this is one of the reasons why I'm convinced that the same writer of the gospel wrote the epistle, because the repetition is the same. The idea that these themes are just beat into the heads of the listener, so that if you don't get this, you're not paying attention to the book. Okay, so again, this is an important element, and when we look at the book in total, okay, so we can look at a particular passage and we could say, oh, this is a great passage, but we have to think of the message of the book. What is the message John is trying to get across? And that's the message he keeps repeating over and over and over again. Okay, so we talked about love as being one of the themes, and also one of the other themes of 1 John is talking about assurance. And as we talk today in about chapter 3 and chapter 4, one of the things I want you to notice is the number of times John uses the word or the phrase "so that you may know," or that you may recognize, that you can understand this. Okay, and in fact, we're going to start with verse 19. He's going to say, "This we know." Then in verse 20, we have confidence. Then at the end of verse 24, this is how we know. 4:1, this is how you recognize. 4:6, this is how you recognize. 4:13, this is how we know. Okay, so again, here John is writing these things to people at a crossroads, people that are seeing defections. They're people seeing, in one of the texts that I was looking at calls them secessionists, people who have seceded, people who previously had been a part of their assembly that they thought were one of them, but had now left, teaching another gospel or another variant of the truth, a lie, as John puts it. Okay, and so John is focusing on that, but he's talking to his original readers, and he's giving them stuff that they can know. Okay, so beginning with verse 19, I'm going to read verse 19 through 23 here. This is how we know that we belong to the truth, and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask, because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command: to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. Okay, so now in verse 19, John is again, he previously he has gone through a passage where he said, people who don't do this aren't one of us, or people who don't love their brothers aren't one of us, or they don't know God, they don't have God in their heart, and all that kind of stuff. And now in verse 19, he's taking a little shift, and he's going, okay, now here's one way to know. Okay, here's a way to know that you belong to the truth. Okay, and it basically has to do with one of two things, and it has to do with whether or not your conscience or your heart condemns you. Okay, or are you feeling the guilt of your conscience in a sense? Okay, now he's speaking to believers here. Okay, now we've made that clear. He's speaking to believers although a lot of the stuff that he talks about can be evangelistic and can be useful to non-believers or people who have not yet come to a saving knowledge of Christ. But he is speaking to believers here. And he's saying, how do you know you're of the truth? Okay, well, number one, there's two ways. Okay, this is not a both of them have to happen, but these are two ways that you can know. Number one says, if we are being convicted of something, then it's of God, and you should do something about it. Okay, so this conviction that we have, what we call conviction, this feeling of guilt. Okay, conviction is a biblish word, as Sandra Richter called them. It's a biblish word when people are under conviction. They're feeling the guilt. They're feeling the responsibility of what they've done. Okay, and so and here the NIV translates it that if our hearts condemn us. Okay, so if your inner being is telling you something is wrong, then that's a sign from God. That is God's gift to you, telling you, hey, there's something you need to take care of. Okay, so how do you know that you're of the truth? Well, it bothers you when you're not doing what God tells you to do. Okay, this is one way. It's not the only way. Okay, but it's one way that if you're being convicted of something, then that's God's way of telling you, hey, you need to work on that particular thing. Okay, now this is not, again, what he's talking about here. He says, if our hearts condemn us. Okay, so this is conviction of some disobedience or some negligent act. Okay, that's God's gift. Okay, this is not a promise that God is going to put an idea in your head that, oh, I need to go to Burma, or oh, I need to go to here, something like that. Okay, he's strictly speaking about this particular situation. But secondly, on the other hand, if we are not being convicted, okay, so if your heart is not condemning you, okay, so it's kind of the opposite. So if your heart's being condemned, that's God telling you. If you're not being condemned, then that's your indication that you're okay, and you have the faith and the belief to ask for whatever you want. Okay, so again, he's talking to believers. These are people who truly believe that they have accepted Christ and are just looking for a sign. And John is saying, listen, if you've accepted Christ and you're not being convicted, then you know that you have the faith, that you have dealt with the sin in your life, and you can ask for whatever you want. Okay, this is a goal. Okay, now I don't know that this necessarily ever gets fully realized in people's lives, that we ever get to the point where we are truly without any conviction, truly without sin. Okay, I know there is a school of thought within Protestantism, essentially it's the holiness division, that believes that you can reach a point where you can be completely without sin. I don't know that that's really applicable, because we always have the sin nature. And again, if you're gonna develop a theology of sin and its relationship, and again, sin is that missing of the mark, you're going to have to deal with this text here. Okay, but again, this is a goal that we have. So this is one way to know. Okay, and what is this command? Again, going back to believe in Christ and to love one another as He commanded us. Again, repeating that same thing. So really, if you look back and think of the whole book, what is John talking about? John wants you to love each other. John wants you to love the brothers and sisters. Verse 24, the one who keeps God's command lives in him, and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. Okay, so how do we know we have the Spirit? Well, that's where that conviction, that's where that condemnation comes from, on the one hand. Okay, and again, we had the Spirit from other passages where God illumines us and brings to mind that those kind of things that Jesus talked about in John chapter 14 when he talked about the Spirit coming. Okay, so how do we know we have the Spirit? By that condemnation that we're having. Okay, that's one element, not the only one, but that's one element. How we know we have the Spirit. So, for example, now what that means is that if you're in a position in your life where you're doing things that you know are non-biblical, okay, it doesn't matter what the action is, but if you know this particular action is not biblical, or goes against one of Jesus' commands, and it doesn't bother you a whit, Okay, well, that's an indication that you don't have the Spirit. Okay, so that's kind of the thing. So as a believer, and this is getting back into the conversation we had earlier about whether a person can continue to sin. Okay, so if you are in sin, if you are, and your heart is not condemning you, then that's that you're not part of the brethren. Okay. All right, so John's going to shift gears a little bit here in verse 1, chapter 4, verse 1. Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Okay? This is interesting here. It says, Debbie and I were just talking about, I mentioned Burma a little bit earlier. We just did a class project for the class we're in dealing with Myanmar. And Debbie was talking, in her part of the group project, was talking about the culture and about the various spirit worship that goes on in Myanmar within the Theravada Buddhism, animism kind of mix that's going on there. And they talk about the different spirits that they appeal to, the Nats, N-A-T, that they appeal to, these spirits. And you know, this spiritism, this animism is something that's very much alive, this belief, and it was alive then, it's alive now. But I think John has gone beyond simply talking about that sort of thing. He's, you know, people are coming in and saying, I have the Spirit, and the Spirit told me this. Okay? And John is saying, test them. Test them. Do not believe every spirit. Okay? But test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out in the world. So if somebody comes to you and says, listen, this is what I think the Spirit is teaching here, somebody like, I don't know, me, if I come in there and say, hey, this is what I think this is saying, you should test it. You should look at it and go, I don't know, is that guy right? Is he right? This is one of those interesting facts that every preacher in the world says they want this. Okay? But few really want somebody to go in and go, you know, that message you preached last week, you know, I was really looking in the Bible, and I don't really think it's accurate. No preacher wants to hear that. Okay? And that's fine. And that's acceptable and that's understandable, but they need to. Okay, so there's a lot of things. I don't want to do a lot of things. I don't want to exercise. I don't want to eat healthy, but it's something that I need to do, as my doctor and wife continue to tell me. Okay, these are things I need to do, whether I want to do them or not. Okay, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Okay, this is interesting because John is talking in 70, 80 AD about many false prophets being in the world. These are people who say they have a word from God that is false. Okay, that is just not true. And there are stories in the Old Testament as well about false prophets. You can cry peace, peace when there is no peace. Okay, but here John is saying, listen, even here in the first century, it's a problem. And let me ask you, has this changed? No. Okay, has this changed? No, not at all. It's interesting that I'm, I do a lot of following on Twitter. I don't do a lot of talking on Twitter itself, but it seems to me on Twitter, it's like everyone's got a book. Everyone's got a book, and they're out to fix Christianity, and they've got this is how Christianity has gone wrong, and this is how to fix it. Or this is what the Bible really says. And there's a bazillion of them. There's, who knows? There's probably I don't know, a dozen Christian book publishers, and every one of them is looking for one. Okay, test them. Okay, you should test them, and they got to have content. It's a business. They got to have content. So just because somebody says something or puts it in a book doesn't mean it's right. Just because somebody is saying it in a video in a nicely pressed shirt doesn't make it right. I remember talking to a woman once who we were talking about a person, a popular teacher at the time that we were both familiar with, and she had read a book that he had written and was making the argument from this particular book that he had written, and was very much in favor of this, and said, oh yeah, you got to do this, and I'm like, no, I disagree, and here's why. And I remember her saying, but he wrote this big thick book. Okay, so well, that's great. There's a lot of big thick books, but that doesn't make them right. Okay, and John is saying, test them all. Okay, don't just test the ones that you think. And this is here it says, test every spirit. Okay, test every spirit, not just the ones that you think are wrong. And I'll just let slide the other ones, because here's what happens. And this is a side note. my pet peeve in the universe, okay, in the Christian universe, okay, and here it is. In modern day Western U.S. Christianity, it is my opinion that what we do is we start with the conclusion, and if we like the conclusion, we assume that the process up there is okay. Okay? So if somebody says, pulls out a Bible verse, quotes a Bible verse and says, now, therefore, you should love your parents. We all go, well, that's right. We should all love your parents. So obviously, that verse means that you should love your parents. Okay? Well, not necessarily the case. So really, anytime you hear a message, anytime you hear a lesson, you should listen to the lesson, you should look at the lesson, you should think to yourself, is that right? Is that right? And I'll tell you what, I get a lot out of messages that I disagree with. I really do. Okay? I'll sit there and I'll listen to the message or the lesson or whatever it is, and I'll go to my Bible and I'll think, okay, well, here's why that's not right. Or here's why that is right. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay? Test every spirit, because many false prophets. This is how, verse 2, this is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Okay? Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. Okay? We watched a video a while back, again, for a class that we were in. We were watching this video, and it was a very churchy sounding song, a very worshipy kind of sounding song. And we started, but the lyrics were just a little bit off. And I know Debbie did a little more research into the group itself, but came to the conclusion very quickly that this is a group that does not believe Jesus, or actually believes that Jesus has actually come back and is living in China right now. So it's a fun little group. And I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, is this from God? No. Okay, no, because they don't acknowledge that Jesus is, the Spirit here. Okay, and again, John said earlier, who is a liar? He that does not believe that Jesus is the Christ. So again, think of the repetition and think of the effect on the original readers. And so John is harping on these points. He's repeating these points. Love your neighbor. Love your brother. Love your sister. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Christ. Love your neighbor. Love your brother. Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, so really when it gets done with that, we're going to get to the end of 1 John. We're going to go, what's the theme of 1 John? What's 1 John about? Love your brother. Love your sister. Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, because he keeps repeating this. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. And I think he's referring to these secessionists, these ones who have left. Okay, I think he's kind of a sideways little allusion to them. Okay. Verse 4, you, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. Okay. Remember John 16:33? In this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Okay. There's another song, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Okay. They are from the world. Okay. Greater is he that is... I'm sorry. Let me start back with verse 4. You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. They, here I think he's talking about the secessionists, are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them. Okay? We are from God, and whoever knows God listens to us, but whoever is not from God does not listen to us. This is how we recognize the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood. Okay? Is it coming from the viewpoint of the world or not? Okay. Now, I mean, part of the problem I think in Christianity is, we want to be popular, and we all do. I want to be popular, and we want to have huge churches, and we want to have 10,000 people. But I think it was Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher back in the late 19th century. In fact, I know it was Kierkegaard. He wrote a column or just a brief article, and it was titled "In the Crowd." The crowd doesn't contain truth, or in the crowd isn't truth. Okay, something to that effect. And the idea of it, and I read the whole thing, and the whole idea is just because you have a crowd of people doesn't mean you're right. Okay, sometimes people are getting together for other reasons. Okay, and are they following the advice of the world? And I think here, when you start talking about church dynamics and church planting and how do you grow your church, well, is your voice coming from the world or is it coming from God? Now, does that mean we can't use the strategy of the world? Well, of course we can. Okay, and we can use physical things to make church more palatable or make church more enjoyable for people. But that doesn't mean we need to water down the truth of the gospel. Okay, this is how we recognize the Spirit of God. Does it speak from the world or not? Dear friends, verse 7, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Here we are back to the love your brother, love your sister. Jesus is the Messiah. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love God, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. Does this verse sound familiar at all? I mean, this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Let me go on to verse 10. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. Doesn't that sound like John 3:16? For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Okay, again, John just revisiting this theme. It's like, okay, this is the ultimate show of love, the ultimate indication of the love of God. Dear friends, okay, this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice. We talked about that. This is that wonderful old theological word, propitiation. Okay, atoning sacrifice. This was a sacrifice that covered it all. Okay, that took care of it all. Again, if you're going to do a theology of sin and salvation, you're going to come to this verse here. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Okay? Again, what did Jesus say? Love others as I have loved you. No one has ever seen God. This is, of course, talking about God the Father. But if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. I went to a church for several years where it wasn't exactly the motto of the church, but one of the oft repeated phrases was to be Jesus to people. And I always liked that. I mean, that was sort of an element. It was during the time when the What Would Jesus Do was real popular, the WWJD bracelets and things. We never got into that, but it would just be Jesus. What would Jesus do? I mean, be Jesus. Not just be Jesus to people, And he says, people can't see God, but they can see you. Okay? And what you do is how people are going to view God. Okay? And again, this is part of the problem we've had recently, that evangelicals, anytime an evangelical takes a fall, whether they're caught in some sin or get caught up in some wacky political idea, the rest of the world looks at that and goes, that's what God must be like. Okay? And John is telling you that's how they're going to know. Okay, based on that. Verse 13. This is how we know, again, the knowing, the knowledge, the assurance, that we live in him and he is in us. He has given us of his Spirit. Okay, again, he's repeating what he said earlier. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. Okay? So there's a twofold purpose to this particular statement. Okay? He has given us a Spirit. Okay? And what is this? One, for our own personal assurance, one of the things. And the other thing he's given us a Spirit is to test the spirits. Okay? That he talked about earlier. And we have seen, and again, John could be talking about himself or the apostles, or maybe he's just talking about the church in general. I think he's talking about, kind of him and the apostles together. Testify that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. And if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is God, remember, love your brother, love your sister. Jesus is God. Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Messiah. Okay? And so we know, Verse 17, this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Let me read something here from Romans 8, verses 14 through 17. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. Okay, there's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. How is it that this perfect love, there's this assurance that we have this perfect love of God? It removes that fear of, like, does he really want it? I mean, there's this joke about, or there's a song about, being engaged and put a ring on it and all that what does an engagement ring do, or what does a wedding ring do? I mean, it just drives out fear. It's like, am I married? Yes, I'm married. I've got a wedding ring. Am I engaged? Yes, I've got an engagement ring. Okay, it's a way, not the only way, and it's not, it's just one example of how, this perfect love, when you have committed and to that person, and you can say yes, and it drives out the fears, like, does he, doesn't he? Okay, so again, there's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear, and God certainly has that perfect love. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Love God, love your brother, love God. I'm going to get this right by the end. I'll figure it all out. Love God, love your brother, love your sister. Jesus is Messiah. Okay. Whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Okay. Now, here's the thing. I don't know that Jesus is pointing this out, or John is pointing this out so much as a command, as much as a natural result. Okay. And the idea is that it's just this is what happens. Okay. It's not unlike in Ephesians 6 when we talk about the fruit of the Spirit. Okay, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long suffering, etc. Okay, when you plant an apple tree and an apple grows, okay, and again, being, having the gardener wife around, I deal with this a lot. When you plant a particular plant, whatever that's the broccoli plant or a bean plant or an apple tree or a pear tree, and the tree grows, and all of a sudden one day there's an apple on the apple tree. You're not surprised. You may be surprised that anything grew at all, but the fact that it's an apple doesn't surprise you, because that's what you expect from an apple tree. And I think John is saying here, look, this love for the brothers is going to must come from love of God. Everyone who believes, I'm going to end here with this passage, 5:1. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. Okay, so this is, again, in order to be born of God, you have to believe that Jesus is the Christ. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ, you're born of God. It's sort of, I believe they call it a tautology, that these two just go together. The one goes with the other. Everyone who believes, and everyone who loves the Father loves his child as well. This is how we know that we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. And what were his commands? To love your brother and sister. Love your brother, love your sister. Jesus is the Messiah. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands. Okay, what did Jesus say? If you love me, keep my commands. What is John saying? What's love for God? Keeping his commands. And his commands are not burdensome. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. Again, repeating what he said earlier, hearkening back to John 16:33. In this world you're going to have trouble, but don't worry, I have overcome the world. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Again, the great hymn, faith is the victory that overcomes the world. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, only the one. Again, if you're going to talk about salvation, you're going to have to come to this verse. Only the one who believes. Is there any other way to overcome the world according to John? No. Only the one who believes that Jesus is the Christ, or Jesus is the Son of God. Compare this to John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. I know one of the secular critiques of Christianity is that it's an exclusive religion, that it only guarantees its benefits to those who are part of its. Well, yeah, that's kind of the nature of what a religion is. Okay, but that's exactly what Jesus is saying. Only All right, what John is saying, only the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. So again, let me end with this. What is John talking about? Love your brother, love your sister. Jesus is the Messiah. Okay? It's a time at a crossroads. So what should you know? People are splitting off. People, different ideas are coming in. Disciples are dying off. What do I need to remember? Love your brother, love your sister. Focus on Jesus as the Son of God. Okay? Focus on the person and work of Jesus. Okay? That's how you test the spirits. You love your brother. Is he a believer? I don't know. Does he love his brother? Does he love his sister? Does he believe Jesus is the Son of God? Okay? We'll finish up. I think we'll finish 1 John next time when we get back, and then maybe we'll jump into 2nd and 3rd John as well. So again, thank you very much for being with me. And if you're going to do anything, you should love your brother, love your sister this week.